The candles were still burning when the city died. I held one in my hands, a thick tallow candle, the kind we made in the shop on the street behind the Hagia Sophia. And I remember thinking how strange it was that something so small could still give light on a night like that. The night of May 28th, 1453, the last night Constantinople would ever be Roman. My name is Nikolaos. I was a scribe by trade, 26 years old with ink-stained fingers in a rented room above a chandler's workshop, and I had never held a sword. I had never wanted to. But history, I learned that night, does not ask what you want before it walks through your door. What I witnessed in the hours between sunset on the 28th and dawn on the 29th of May, inside the Hagia Sophia, along the ancient Theodosian walls and in the streets where families knelt in the dark and prayed, is not the story you'll find in most history books. The books remember the generals, the sultans, the siege engines, the numbers. But I remember the woman who wouldn't leave her icon, the soldier who laughed because he didn't know what else to do. The silence, and I mean a silence so complete it felt physical, that fell over an entire city of 50,000 people in the hours before midnight. What the history books don't tell you is what it actually felt like to be alive inside the last night of an empire. A civilization that had lasted without interruption for over 1,000 years. And I was there. If this story pulls you in, and I promise you it will, hit subscribe and stay with me. Because what happened between that last candle and that first dawn is one of the most human stories ever recorded. Constantinople in the spring of 1453 was a city that smelled like salt water and old stone. The Golden Horn, the curved harbor inlet that had protected the city for centuries, carried a constant breeze off the Bosphorus, cool even in May, cutting through the smoke of cooking fires and the heavier scent of tallow from the workshops near our street. If you stood at the right angle on the hill above the harbor, you could see the Hagia Sophia rising above everything else, its great dome catching the morning light like something that had decided long ago that it would never fall. The city I knew was not the city it had once been. That is important to understand. Archaeological surveys and Byzantine chronicles tell us that by 1453, Constantinople had contracted dramatically from its imperial peak. Where 1 million people had once filled these streets, fewer than 50,000 now remained. Entire neighborhoods had emptied over centuries of plague, crusade, and economic collapse. There were vineyards growing inside the city walls. Goats grazed in the ruins of old forums. And yet, life was there. On our street, the baker opened before sunrise. The monks from the monastery of Kora walked in pairs at dusk, and their chanting audible 2 blocks away. Women carried water and clay amphorae from the cisterns. Those vast underground chambers still standing, still full, carved out of the earth by emperors dead 1,000 years. Children played in the shadow of walls built by Theodosius II in 413 AD. Walls that had, in those 1,000 years, never once been breached from the outside. I grew up believing those walls were forever. Most of us did. And that belief, that quiet, unexamined certainty, was perhaps the most dangerous thing we carried into that final spring. The siege had been going on for 53 days before the last night came. Mehmed II had arrived outside the walls on April 6th with an army that contemporary sources estimate at between 60,000 and 80,000 men. We inside the walls numbered perhaps 7,000 defenders, soldiers, volunteers, Genoese mercenaries under the command of Giovanni Giustiniani, and civilians who had never trained for war. And the mathematics were not difficult. Everyone could see them. And yet, somehow, we kept not believing what the numbers were telling us. There had been signs before the siege even began. Byzantine chroniclers recorded that in the weeks prior, an icon of the Virgin Mary at being carried through the streets in a traditional protective procession slipped from its platform and fell face down into the mud. The men who tried to lift it found it, by their account, impossibly heavy. Here the procession halted. People wept in the street. That same week, an unseasonable fog rolled in off the Bosphorus so thick that the city disappeared inside it. And then, at night, witnesses reported a strange light surrounding the dome of the Hagia Sophia. a flickering illumination with no source, rising and then fading. Historians note this was likely a meteorological phenomenon. We did not know that then. What we knew was the sound of the Ottoman cannons. Mehmed had commissioned a Hungarian engineer named Urban to build a bombard unlike anything the world had seen, capable of firing a stone ball weighing 1,200 pounds. We heard it every day. We felt it in our chests. We swept the plaster dust from our floors and told ourselves the walls would hold. The walls had always held. But on the night of May 28th, Giustiniani's scouts sent word that the Ottomans had gone quiet. No cannon fire, no movement. Just stillness, ice stretching across the entire length of the enemy camp. We didn't know then that silence was the loudest sign of all. The final assault began at approximately 1:30 in the morning on May 29th, 1453. I know that now. In the moment, there was no clock. There was only the sound I have no adequate word for, of tens of thousands of voices rising simultaneously from outside the walls. Drums, horns, and then, beneath all of it, the low percussion of feet moving in unison across dry ground. Yet the Ottoman forces came in waves by deliberate strategy. First the irregular troops, the Bashi bazouks, exhausting the defenders, then the Anatolian regulars, and finally, in the dark hours before dawn, the elite janissaries, the Sultan's most disciplined soldiers, moving in tight formation, in silence, toward the section of wall near the Blachernae Palace that had taken the heaviest cannon damage over 53 days. Giustiniani was struck by a projectile sometime around 3 in the morning. The wound was serious. His men, seeing their commander carried from the walls, began to pull back. This moment, documented in multiple independent eyewitness accounts, is considered by historians the precise hinge on which the city turned. A gate was left unlocked in the confusion. Ottoman soldiers found it. They were inside the walls before the main defense understood what had happened. In the city, we heard the change in sound before we understood it. The fighting, in which had been directional, out there, beyond the walls, was suddenly everywhere. Women gathered children. Men picked up whatever was nearest. I ran toward the Hagia Sophia because it was the only place I could think of that felt permanent. Thousands of others had the same instinct. The great doors closed behind us. The candles inside were still burning. Outside, the last emperor of Byzantium, Constantine XI Palaiologos, removed his imperial regalia, stepped into the fighting as a common soldier, and was never seen again. 1,000 years. And then a Tuesday morning, the doors of the Hagia Sophia held until they didn't. When Ottoman soldiers finally entered, the sources tell us they found the interior packed with civilians. Men, women, children, priests still mid-prayer at the altar. The great church that Justinian had built in 537 AD, the building that had stood as the largest cathedral in the world for nearly 1,000 years, fell silent in a way it never had before. I was there, in the back, pressed against a column of porphyry marble that was cool against my cheek. I remember the light. The candles were still burning. Nobody had thought to put them out. Mehmed II entered the city later that morning. By multiple accounts, including the Ottoman historian Tursun Beg, he walked into the Hagia Sophia, ordered a cleric to recite the Islamic call to prayer from its pulpit, and then stood for a long time, looking at the building around him. What he said, according to those present, was this: "What a city we have given over to plunder and destruction." Even victory, it seems, carries its own kind of grief. Constantinople became Istanbul. The Hagia Sophia became a mosque. The Byzantine Empire and the continuation of Rome, unbroken since Augustus, ceased to exist on a Tuesday in May. Historians mark it as the end of the Middle Ages. Even what archaeology has given back to us is extraordinary. Beneath modern Istanbul, excavations for a railway tunnel in 2013 uncovered Byzantine harbor structures, shipwrecks, and artifacts that had lain undisturbed since before the fall. The city did not disappear. It went underground. It waited. The Theodosian walls still stand today. You can walk along them. You can put your hand on stones that were already 600 years old when the cannons came. And if you stand there long enough, in the right kind of quiet, you can almost hear what 50,000 people sounded like when they finally understood that forever had an end date. We were a civilization. We were 1,000 years of candlelight. And now you know what it felt like to be the last one holding the flame. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who loves history. Because Constantinople deserved to be remembered as more than a conquest. It was a world. It was a life. And for one night you were inside it.